I'm going to be talking you through how to carry the yarn when you're doing a striping pattern where your stripes are fairly narrow. I'm going to be showing you how we carry that yarn up and don't cut the yarn between stripes. We leave everything connected. So in the pattern that we're doing, which is for the stripy sweater, we are going to be doing 2 rows with the contrast color and then 3 rows with the solid background color. So I have done one of those already, and you can see I left the contrast colors connected the whole way up. I didn't cut this at all. I just carried it up along behind me as I was knitting with the 3 rounds with the darker colored blue. And now I finished the 3 rows with the darker color blue, and so I'm ready to start with the light again. So I am going to, and I'm right here at the beginning of my round, I have been knitting all along with my dark blue. So I've been doing this, knitting along with the darker blue. I'm simply going to let go of the darker blue one and pick up the one that I am using. I do want to do this so that I kind of wrap the yarns around each other. That way you don't get sort of long strings of yarn that you can kind of catch your fingers on as you go. So I just want to make sure that when I pick up my light blue, I want to kind of wrap it behind that dark blue, but truly that easily. And now I'm going to start working with my light blue, and I'm just going to leave the dark blue hanging out back there. It's not in my way at all, and I'm just going to begin working with the light blue. And the pattern has us knit 1 full row with the contrast color. If you haven't worked with circular needles before and you're working with circular needles right now, when you get to the end of one circular needle, you lay it down. I always prefer to do a couple of stitches on just the 3 needles, and then pick the circular needle back up again. And so you're simply going to knit all the way around to the beginning with the contrast yarn, leave the blue yarn connected, purl all the way around with the contrast color yarn, leave the blue connected, and then do the exact same thing that I just showed you. Let go of the contrast color yarn and pick up the blue yarn and bring that around with you as you go. And that's how you do your stripes. So this pattern is going to have you do 3 stripes with the contrast before you switch to a new contrast color, and I'm going to be using the green as the next contrast color. So you don't cut the contrast color until you're completely finished using it. So you'll have 1 tail at the beginning, and then you'll have 1 tail at the very end after you finish the 3rd stripe with the contrast. And with the main color yarn, you'll have 1 tail at the very beginning of your piece, and you will not ever cut this yarn until you run out of the first ball and you need another ball, depending on what size you're making. I am now going to be showing you how we divide the sleeves off of this yoked style sweater that we've been working on so far. So at the beginning of the sweater, we've cast on for the neckline. We've knit down and done all of our stripes and all of our increases. And now we need to divide the sleeves, the portion that later will come back and knit the sleeve portion. We need to get that off of our needles so that we can continue knitting and working our way down the body of the sweater. So that's what I'm going to be showing you right now. Do be aware, as we have been going all along, our stitch marker has marked the center back of our sweater. You're always going to have the little jog where your stripes join, so we just want that to be in the center back. We don't want that to be sort of at one of the seams for where our sleeves is going to be. So right there at the center back, I'll put this one out of the way, and you can see the little sample one. Just because it's boring to watch someone knit across all of the stitches in a full-size sweater, I've got a little mini sweater going here. So we've done the neckline, we've done a little bit of an increase. Our stitch marker here shows where our stripe join is. This has been our beginning of the round marker all along. And now we're just ready to follow the stitch counts that are listed for the size that you're making in the pattern. But you are going to knit across basically half the stitches for your back, because this is the halfway point. So the other half of the stitches that will become the back of your sweater are on the other side here. So we're going to knit across half the stitches for the back. And on this particular sweater, my little mini one here, that's going to be 8. So I'm going to knit across 8 stitches, and I'd knit a few just so that my stitch marker didn't fall out when I didn't want it to. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. So once you've knit across the number for your size, depending on what size you're doing, looking at your pattern there, then the pattern is going to tell you to slide the stitches that will become your sleeves onto some waste yarn. The exact number of stitches, again, is going to depend on the size that you're doing. In my tiny little mini example, it's going to be 10 stitches. My favorite way to divide things is to actually use a tapestry needle with some contrasting color yarn. I cannot recommend highly enough, pick a yarn for your waste yarn that is a strikingly different color than the regular yarn that you're using. So I just put some waste yarn onto a tapestry needle. The pattern says slide however many stitches. So for me on my mini sweater, that's going to be 10. Slide 10 stitches. Notice when I'm putting this in, I'm putting my tapestry needle in like I'm doing a purl stitch and just sliding it across. All that means is that my stitches are not going to be twisted when they're going on to that. So 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So once you've slid all of the stitches, I push the stitches that I'm not going to be using right then away from the tip so that nothing falls off when I don't want it to. And I'm just going to pull all of those stitches down onto my waste yarn. You can go ahead and take your tapestry needle off and set it aside. And I always like to tie the ends of my waste yarn together. This way, no stitches are going to accidentally fall off the ends of your waste yarn. Now this is going to be the sleeve of your sweater. So if you think about my little mini sweater here, this is the sleeve of that sweater. I am going to want to try my sweater on as I'm going, and so I want to make sure the waist yarn that I put my sleeve on is big enough that my arm will comfortably fit through it so that I can try my sweater on. So when I tie the ends of my yarn, I want to make sure when I cut the yarn that it's big enough to comfortably go around my arm. And then when I tie it, I want to make sure I don't tie it right up tight so that I can't put my arm through there. That's just going to be helpful later for you to try your sweater on and make sure you're liking the size that you've got before you commit to doing the whole sweater before you try it on. The pattern is then going to tell you to cast on some stitches. There are a variety of ways to cast on stitches in the middle of a row like this. This is basically going to be, let me grab up my big sweater again. This is going to be that armpit section. So you can see here's where my stitches were all the way up on the arm. There's just this extra couple of inches here. It's about 2 inches on this size. This is the extra large size that I have extra. So you'll cast on extra stitches here for the body. You'll pick up extra stitches along there when we go to do the sleeves, but I'll show you how that works later on when you're to that point. So you're just creating this little bit of fabric that is underneath your arm in this style of sweater. So, to cast on stitches, the fastest and easiest way to do it is going to be using something called backward loop. Normally, I am not at all a backward loop cast on fan, but for this application, I think it may be a good option for you. And so literally all you're going to do is you're going to take your yarn, create a loop of yarn, and put it over your knitting needle. Everything stays in the same hand that you've been working all along. The needle that you're getting ready to work on stays in your right hand. Or the needle you've just finished working stays in your right hand. The new stitches in your left hand are going to go on there. So you can just, again, create a loop, turn it backwards, and stick it on your needle. I do think this is a little tricky to work into. So the next row when you're coming along to work on here, I do think that it can be a little trickier to work into these stitches than if you did a different style cast on. But I think for creating fabric right in the middle like this, I think this method really does work. So one more time, take my loop, turn it around backwards, put it on the needle. It's the easiest way you could possibly put a loop on your needle. And your pattern is going to tell you how many stitches to cast on there, depending on the size that you are making again. And then it's going to tell us to knit across all of the stitches for the front of our sweater. And so you're just going to join it right up together. So you're going to say, oh, there's all this fabric, what do I do with it? You just kind of let it fold across itself. This is all of the fabric that is going to be your sleeve. the number of stitches that you cast on, so I took 10 stitches off, I only put a couple stitches back on again. You are not going to be putting the same number of stitches on here that you took off. You're not supposed to be. It will be a wildly different number. You'll take off like 100 stitches and put on 15 or something. It's not supposed to be the same. So you're going to have this big fabric flap, and that's where your arm is going to go later on. The pattern is going to now tell you you're going to knit across however many stitches for the front of your sweater. In my case of this mini one, that is going to be 17 stitches. I'm just going to knit across the stitches on this needle here, and then hopefully lay the little mini sweater out so you can see what we're doing, because that is how you divide the stitches for your sleeve. So you can see on here, we've got the neckline up at the top here. We've got what will become the armhole, so it kind of looks like a cap sleeve sweater or a tank top sweater at this point. And then we've got all of the stitches that are going to be on the front and the back, the main body of our sweater here. So you're going to just follow the pattern instructions, doing the exact same thing again. So if the pattern tells you to knit 17 stitches and that's across the front, we're going to knit our 17. And then if it tells us to slip the next 10 stitches for the other sleeve, we're going to slip those onto our waist yarn. We're going to cast on 3 stitches for our little armpit area here, and then we're going to knit to the marker, which will be the other half of the stitches from the back that we had worked on the last time. And that's how our sweater is going to get arms. Now that we have divided the sleeves, so this is the neck of our sweater, here's the 2 sleeves, both on waist yarn that we'll come back to later, and we've cast on the extra stitches underneath the sleeve. That's going to become the armpits of our sweater, and now the only stitches left on our sweater is going to be the front and the back, the main body of our sweater. The very last step that's listed in your pattern here is you're actually going to slip the stitches. So our stitch marker was right here. This was, you can see where our stripe jog was. This is the center back. The pattern tells us to take that stitch marker out, so I've gone ahead and taken that out of my work. And then to slip all of the stitches from the other half of the back of the sweater and all of the stitches that you just cast on for the underarm of your sweater, to just slip those across. So you're not knitting or purling or anything else with those stitches. You're just slipping those across so that where you're getting ready to begin this next row is right here. So just on the other side of the right arm that you've created. And then it does tell you to go ahead and cut your working yarn. It's the one and only time in the whole sweater that you're going to be cutting your working yarn. So you're going to cut that. And now you're going to begin round 1 of the body. No yarn is connected at this point, so the pattern is going to tell you to go ahead and you've gone ahead and put your stitch marker back there. So this is our new beginning of the round. And we are going to join our next contrast color. So to join your yarn, you don't need to tie a knot or anything. You're just going to leave about a 6-inch tail hanging out of the color that you'd like to get started with. And you are just going to begin knitting. So my stitch marker is there. I'm just going to start knitting, just like every other stitch that I've ever knit across. And our pattern tells us to go ahead and knit all the way to very close to the beginning of the round marker again. The number of stitches that you're going to come close to the end is actually going to be the exact same as the number of stitches that you cast on for the armpit. So as I'm knitting across here, my pattern's going to say something for the adult size sweaters like knit until you're 20 stitches from the end, 14 stitches from the end, just depending on the size of the sweater, like small, medium, large that you're making. So you're going to knit all the way across these. This is the first time that we're knitting on just the body stitches of our sweater. And things will get a little tight as you come to this where you did your backward loop cast on. This is one I mentioned in the previous video, where it's not my very favorite cast on for like beginning a brand new project, just because it's hard to get your needle through those stitches. They don't have a lot else going on with them. But you can get through there, and it's a fairly small number of stitches, and you're only going to need to get through them one time on here, so it's okay if you feel like you're struggling a little bit. Another nice thing is, since it is right in the armpit of your sweater, even if it doesn't go as smoothly as you'd hoped and you end up splitting a stitch or something, it's not going to be in a very visible part of your sweater at all. Just go ahead and knit all the way. Sorry, I know this part is not all that interesting to just watch somebody do a bunch of knit stitches. And I split my stitches sometimes too. And I did notice that it felt like all of a sudden my stitch was super loose. That's because I'm right at the center back of my sweater now, where my where my main color yarn is connected. So my pattern tells me to go ahead and knit to between 16 and 24 stitches from the end of my needle. And you can double check that you're definitely at the right point when you've done to the number of stitches that the pattern's telling you to. Those stitches should be the stitches that you cast on new. So you'll see, here's my marker. It said go to 3 stitches from the end for this mini size, and those 3 stitches are the ones that I had cast on with my backward loop cast on. So I know that I went to the correct number on there. And then the pattern says wrap and turn. It's abbreviated W and T. So what in the world does that mean? Step 1 for a wrap and turn, you put your needle in to your stitch as if you are going to purl. Sorry, you may need to loosen that stitch up with your finger just a little bit, as it's harder to manipulate those cast on stitches. So I put my needle into my stitch like I'm going to purl it. I don't purl it, I just slide it on to my right hand needle. I'm going to take my working yarn from where it is now in the back. I'm going to bring it to the front. I'm going to slide that stitch that I just slid. I'm going to slide it right back again. I haven't done anything to that stitch. I haven't twisted it or any funny things at all. I've just laid that yarn between it. So that was the wrap. And now for the turn. I'm going to just turn my needle so that I'm going back the way I came. And the pattern is going to tell me to knit this row. That may seem like the opposite of what you want to be doing because we've turned it inside out, and so theoretically you would want to purl it. But remember, all along we've been making garter ridges. When we were working this in the round, we knit a whole row and then purled a whole row. Since we're essentially working this section flat, we knit this whole row, we turned it around, and we're going to need to knit the next row to get that same look. So my yarn is in the back. That's where I want it because I'm going to be knitting. And I am just going to knit all the way back, knit every stitch back until I come back to where my marker is. So the last stitch that you'll knit will be the last stitch in the contrast color before you hit the main colored stitches again. We're now at the point in the sweater where our stripes are starting to stair step in and get shorter every stripe round that we're doing. And so I want to talk about how we achieve that look. The pattern is going to tell us we have just completed 3 rounds with our main color, just like we've been doing all along, 3 rounds with the main color. And the pattern tells us after we finish that 3rd round with our main color, you'll notice that your main color and your contrast color yarns are both connected at the same spot. So your main color is connected to the stitches on your needle. Your contrast color is connected to the last time you did contrast work, which is 3 rows down there, but they're both connected to the same place. And my stitch marker fell off. So the pattern says you are actually going to remove the marker. So it was okay that it came off. So you just take the marker off and set it aside. You're going to want that again really shortly, so don't put it away too far. The pattern is now going to say, with your main color, securing the contrast color behind. Knit between 7 and 12 stitches depending on what size you're doing. What in the world does that mean? What that means is I'm going to be doing my knitting with my main color. So that's going to be my blue in this case. But I want to carry that green yarn along behind me, very, very similarly to if you were doing a color work project, like a Fair Isle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that blue, I'm going to twist it behind the green. So all I've done is I've trapped that green yarn from where it's connected at the bottom. I've trapped it against the fabric with the blue yarn. And then I'm just going to knit a few stitches with my main color yarn. And then I'm going to do that exact same thing again. So now the last place that my green yarn kind of was tucked in was a few stitches ago. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to wrap my blue yarn around my green yarn just to kind of secure that contrast color there. So the contrast yarn is just wrapped around. And I keep knitting with my main yarn. So I'm going to do that until I've done the number of stitches that my pattern said. So if you're doing the size small, you're going to do it for 7 stitches. If you're doing it for the size large, you're going to do it for 12, or the size 3X, you're going to do it for 12 stitches. All the other sizes somewhere in between there, like the pattern tells you to. On my mini one, obviously I'm doing less than that. So once you've done the number of stitches that your pattern tells you to, it's not going to be tons of stitches, then the pattern tells you to put your marker back on. So we've just moved where our beginning of the round marker starts. It's going to start here this time. And now the pattern is telling us with our contrast color yarn only, so that means let go of your main color yarn. Don't cut it, just leave it connected right there at your stitch marker. Now we are going to knit across. The pattern is going to tell us to knit until we do between 7 and 12, depending on your size, stitches from the last wrap and turn that we did. And again, you may think, what in the world does that mean? Well, the way that we're creating stripes in this pattern is by doing the wrap and turn that we did the last time. And so you see here where this stripe ends, right here, that was the last wrap and turn. So if we're doing the size small, the pattern says we're going to go 7 stitches from where we did that last wrap and turn. So here's my last wrap and turn. I'm just tracing where that stitch was. It's right here. I'm going to go to 7 stitches before there. 2, 4, 6, 7. So that is how I know how far I'm going to knit. So when you're up at the top of your sweater, so you've just started the body knitting, you are going to be knitting almost all the way around your sweater. And then as you go farther down, closer to the bottom hem, towards the hip of the sweater, your stripes are going to stair-step get shorter every time. So you start off with really long rows of your contrast before you do your wrap and turn, but you end up not doing all that many stitches at all there. So when you get to that spot where you're supposed to wrap and turn, just like we did last time, oops. So get to that spot right before your wrap and turn, the number of stitches that your pattern told you to. Just like the last time, to do a wrap and turn, we put our needle in, we slide it across, we bring the yarn from where it is in the back to the front, we slide that stitch we just slid back again, we turn our work, so that's the turn part, and the pattern tells us to knit to the end, so we are going to knit to the end. So I turn around and knit. I'm now working on the next row. So I'm going to knit all the way back to my marker. Then the pattern is going to tell us to start working with the main color yarn. The main color is connected right here at the marker. I'm just going to do my 3 rounds with that. So that is how to do those stair-step stripes that get shorter every row. The last step in finishing the stripy sweater that you've been working on, and obviously yours will be bigger than this one, is going to be to go back for your sleeves. So we cast on at the neckline, we do our increases, we do our color stripes, we divide the sleeves off. We're doing our color stripes that come in this way. We've got videos for all of these things. And now the pattern is going to tell you that after you've bound off at the end and finished everything but the sleeves, it's time to go back and get these sleeves that are on our waist yarn. So you're going to want to start on the side that will have the stripes going all the way down. So that's going to be this side here. The one where the stripes are going to go all the way down the sleeve. The other one is going to just be the solid background color. I would recommend doing the striped one first because that's going to determine the length of the sweater sleeve, and then you can go back and make the solid blue one match. So you're going to start by finding the end of the waist yarn that's got your live stitches on it. You're going to want to go ahead and cut that yarn. And then you can take the stitches and put them on your needle in one of two ways. You can either pull the yarn out all at once and put those new live stitches on your needles, or you can do it as you go. I think most people probably feel more comfortable doing it as you go. Like I said, at the time when we chose our waist yarn to put our stitches on, putting your stitches on a waist yarn that's a strikingly different color than the yarn that you're using makes this step much easier. You're just going to slide your needle through the stitches. And I think sliding on about an inch worth of stitches at a time is going to be about as much as you want to do, and then you can just pull that waist yarn out of there. I think if you wait until the very end to pull the waist yarn out, it just gets a little bit tricky to get that waist yarn to come out. So you slide the stitches back onto your needle, and at this point your working yarn is not connected. It can be a little bit tricky, as I am illustrating here, to get your needle through those loops. So just keep working at it until you get it through. I'm just going to go ahead and pull out my waist yarn, all together. So the other option is if you pull your waist yarn out all together, you'll have these live loops. If you're really having trouble getting through, let's see, then that can happen. So if that does happen and you end up losing a stitch, I would go ahead and pick up all of the other stitches and then go back. I find if you try to chase that stitch that you lost before you've caught all the other stitches, what you tend to do is unravel more. So if you get everybody up on your needle first, then you can more easily go back and fix it like that. So you've got all of the stitches from your waist yarn onto your needles. And now, at this point, your working yarn is not connected to your work at all because you've gone ahead and cut your yarn when you bound off at the end here. So what we're going to do now is you're going to pick up one stitch for every one of the stitches that we cast on for this underarm section. So depending on your size, it's going to be somewhere between 14 and 24 stitches that you cast on. For my little mini version, it was 3 stitches along here. And so we are going to, at this point, grab our working yarn. And we're going to pick up a stitch on each of those 3. And picking up stitches, or to pick up and knit stitches, I always think of as a little bit more of an art than an exact science. We know how many stitches we're aiming for, so we're aiming for 3, and I kind of just want to evenly space them along there. You can see, here's one bump, here's another bump, here's a third bump, so if you can find landmarks like that so you know exactly where you're going to pick up, that works. If not, you can kind of just eyeball it. As long as you've got the correct number and they're spaced pretty evenly, it's going to work out just fine. I would always say put your needle under at least 2 strands. If you put your needle under just 1 strand, it stretches out big and gives you a hole. So I've got my needle under the 2 strands where I want to start. I just take my working yarn, I leave about a 6-inch tail hanging. I lay that yarn across, and I'm going to pull it through. As long as you've got then just the one loop on your needle, you've done it the right way. And then make sure that as you continue to work, you're working with not the short stubby end, but the end connected to your ball of yarn, and you're going to pick up the other 3 stitches. Now I'm going to put my needle in, get under at least 2 strands, lay my yarn across, and if it doesn't go through the first time, you just repeat the process. Pull that through. And the last one, put your needle in, lay your yarn across, pull that through. So now I've picked up 1 in each of my needles. And now you are simply going to knit all the way around. So your working yarn is connected, you're right there at the edge where the live stitches are back on your needle. You're just going to start knitting just like normal. So this first round is going to be the 3rd blue. So all along you do 3 rows of your main color and then a knit row and a purl row with your contrast color. When you put your sleeve stitches on waste yarn, you had done 2 of the 3 rows of background color. So you're going to do 1 row of your background main color, just knit like normal before you're going to start adding your stripes in again.